This story started in the morning. The guy is getting some sleep after last night's party, but as usual, someone tries to wake him up and won't let him rest. Some girl comes into his room and reminds him that today is a very important day. She came to help him get ready, because she knows that without her, he will sleep through the whole thing and won't even open his eyes. To get the guy up as soon as possible and unable to lie in bed, she opened the dark curtains that were holding back the sunlight. She opened them by a small slit, and that was already enough to make him wake up. Like all people, he doesn't really like it when someone starts waking him up without asking whether he wants to or not. The girl wished good morning, but in response he purposely ignored her and didn't say anything. The thing is that today they have a lot of important things to do. They need to quickly prepare to go to court. Otherwise, they just will not be missed. The girl was more punctual, and unlike him, she is already fully packed and ready to go out. She doesn't understand how you can sleep so long, because a normal person needs half as much time to sleep as he does. A guy can sleep for 24 hours, and after that, still say he didn't sleep well. When he opened his eyes, as usual, he started to justify that he was drunk on some strange drinks. And because of that, it was so hard for him to wake up early in the morning, although even on a normal day, he tries to come up with similar excuses. As suddenly, his assistant knocked on the room. The guy allowed him to enter and asked what was wrong. The assistant informed him that a young lady wanted to meet him right now. She refused to leave and warned that she would not leave until this guy came out to her. For some reason, he thought it was one of the girls he had met at last night's party. He got angry and decided that now she was going to really regret trying to come to his house after almost poisoning him with a strange drink. The lady he lives with offered her help. She said she could go out to the guest and solve the problem with her because that way he wouldn't even have to talk to her. The girl is used to simplify his life and everything, and always. She's trying to be very comfortable, so that in the future, he will propose to her and want to marry her. In the end, he refused and said he had to solve the problem himself and he didn't want to take it out on her, because he was the one at the party, and he should make sure the lady doesn't come here again. But before that, he had to get ready, choose the right clothes, and only after that, the two of them started to go down to the first floor. The guy even rehearsed the words to be more convincing and not to look sleepy. It may seem that this girl, one of his assistants, but in fact, it is not so. She has long been in love with the Lord, and he just comfortable to live with her. She is always near and very often helped him out. The guy has never thought about it, but it seems that if he's without her for even one day and has to decide something on his own, he'll realize how much she is to him. Without whom, he can't go on with his life anymore. The ladies of high society are special individuals. They are the girls whose faces are forever adorned with fake smiles. They are not even afraid to show with a single look what they really think about the person they are talking to or know, and everyone knows about it perfectly well. The thing is that one of these aristocrats came up to him last night at a party and did something to him, after which he hates her and wants revenge, because no one has ever let herself treat him like that before. Now he is sure that on the first floor he is waiting for her, the aristocrat, who got him drunk with something unknown to get at least one evening together, because she has loved him for a long time and has followed him more than once to find out where to meet him and get acquainted with him. She used a lot of traps, manipulations, and tricks to get his attention, and in the end, the guy regretted looking in her direction and agreed to talk to her. At some point, he notices that in the distance of the corridor is really someone standing and waiting for him for more than half an hour. The guy gets angry and ready to tell her everything he thinks about her. He is unpleasant to even think and accept the fact that she even dared to come to his house at such an early hour. The more he thinks about it, the more he becomes angry and indignant that he was surrounded by such people. The arrogance, selfishness, and permissiveness of women from high society, he was very much tired of it. They do allow themselves too much, because if the girl had just asked if he wanted to get to know her, things could have been completely different, and maybe he would have agreed to one date. He's ready to say what he thinks of her behavior and scare her that if she ever tries to show up where he is again, she'll regret it. Meanwhile, not realizing that the gentleman is on his way, the butler tries to stop this girl, but she stubbornly resists and wants to go straight to his room. At some point, the girl breaks free and starts running towards the gentleman. The butler had no time to catch her and was very surprised that she even allows herself, because such a thing, as far as he remembers, has never happened before. He doesn't remember any guest who would allow himself something like that. He doesn't even know how to react to it, because he realizes that he can't catch up with her anyway. It's better to just explain everything to the gentleman and tell him how it was later on. Literally, the second the girl stepped on the first step to go up to the second floor, she saw a guy who is already outraged and is not going to hold back. He definitely has something to say. When suddenly, she didn't even have time to greet him and tell him why she came. The gentleman started accusing her and shouting so hard that it was audible even to the street. He thinks there should be a limit to such behavior. At the very least, she showed up unannounced, started running around his house, instead of waiting quietly on the first floor to see if he wanted to see her at all, as guests who have at least some respect for the host do. Right after that, the girl started smiling. It was as if she ignored him and started asking what he was even talking about. At the same time, the gentleman looks at her and realizes that this is not at all who he expected to see. He looks surprised, as if he saw someone he hadn't seen in 10 years. Partially so. It turned out that he was expecting to see someone else, but he saw someone he could forgive for such behavior. I'm very curious about who this girl is and who she is to him, because it's obvious that they definitely know each other, and it's not a friendly relationship at all. The guy stopped yelling at her, saw her sweet smile and eyes, and for a moment remembered the times they had been together. Except that the fact that she was laughing was a little confusing to him. Their communication ended in a bad way, and it's strange that she is so happy to come visit him. He doesn't understand how to react and what to say to that. As soon as he stopped shouting at the whole house, she was not afraid and started to go upstairs to him. As suddenly, the girl accidentally tripped and almost fell down. The gentleman caught it in time and didn't even notice how it happened. It happened somehow on its own, unknowingly and accidentally. Very interesting what will happen next, because so far the situation is as unclear as possible. Only they know what is happening and who they are for each other, because even the assistant could not remember who she is. Unlike him, the girl is not nervous at all. She continues to smile and pretend that she's very happy to see him, although in fact, came not at all to chat nicely and recall the happy past. She didn't stall and immediately admitted that she wanted to officially file for divorce. Usually people say this with a sad look or at least some kind of resentment, but she was happy to say it and didn't even hide it. He looked at her as if he'd heard something very surprising. Had they really had a wedding and still hadn't made the separation official? With the paperwork, as it should be. The girl who lives with him now is completely clueless. He never talked about his past relationships, and for some reason she was sure he didn't have any. In order not to miss anything and to hear everything, the male assistant immediately went upstairs to them and explained that he just wanted to be there to help or advise them at any time. In the meantime, the boy was frozen in one place, as if speechless, wondering what he would say to that. For now he was awake and not thinking of going back to sleep. After that, he wanted to ask the girl to say the same thing. But again, he thought he had heard it. But the girl replied that he had understood her absolutely correctly. Then she requested that he look at her carefully from all sides and see that she had turned 18. The girl had not just paid attention to it. She came close to him, took his hands and said they must do something about it once and for all. She demanded a separation, for if they didn't, she couldn't marry anyone else. The fact is that, according to the rules, lovers can marry at almost any age. But divorce is possible only after one of the lovers is 18 years old. She had been waiting for this moment for a very long time, and therefore, so much to rejoice over. At this moment, a girl who was most interested to know what was happening now came up to them. Unexpectedly, she asked if she'd understood correctly that they had been husband and wife before, and now the girl wanted to separate in order to freely start a new relationship. The guest replied that it was just so. She began to apologize for disturbing her lover at such an early hour, and then asking to be understood in her, if she had come at any other time, he probably wouldn't have been home. But so that no one would worry, Alice cheered them up and told them that she planned to stay at the nearest house, and had no intention of interrupting their idyll. Jake saw her about to leave and asked her to stop. He wanted to talk about it longer, because it would be strange to talk about it in a minute and say goodbye right away. But in fact, she has no desire to stay and talk about anything. Now she has her own life, which does not concern him. Especially, he has a favorite girl, who certainly will not mind that. They did everything quickly and forgot each other. She wouldn't even listen to him and said she would visit them again later. Alice only asked him to prepare the contract they had drawn up 10 years ago. As soon as the girl left the territory of the mansion, she was immediately discussed by everyone. Even the assistant was not left aside, and was surprised that he could not remember her after so many years. They hadn't seen each other for a long time, and the fact that he couldn't remember her wasn't surprising, because even a guy who should recognize her at first sight didn't immediately realize it was Alice. He didn't even immediately remember that he had once signed a 10-year contract with her. The assistant had reminded him of that. It turns out that 10 years ago was the ceremony of their marriage. The girl's family opened a store a few years ago, but now it has turned into a full-fledged trading company. There were rumors that Alice is entirely devoted to the management of the territory and the business. Jake started to remember those times, and for a few minutes, he stopped noticing what was going on around him. For some reason, it was now that he started to remember those times in a special way, and wondered if he was even going to break up with her at all. The guy is just now realizing he made a mistake by not shedding the contract and consequently that great relationship, but does he really think it would be nice to get it all back? At the time, the girl didn't really want to marry him, and during the ceremony she even cried. I wonder what made her do it. She clearly didn't want to start any kind of relationship, especially at an early age. But at the same time, the guy sees everything that happened between them as something nice, and something that he misses a lot. Alice refused to the last minute and wanted to cancel everything. Now I can see why she's so excited when the moment came for her to have the right to cancel the contract. It was like this: 10 years ago, in the house of her parents, there was a very serious and decisive conversation. The girl's mother learns that her husband decided to dispose of the fate of her daughter without consulting her. At the moment when they started talking about it, little Alice came to the house. She heard her parents' voices and decided to go into her room without distraction. But at that moment, she had no idea what her parents were talking about. The girl opens the front door and hears that they are obviously talking about her. The mom is not happy about something and starts blaming the dad. She doesn't understand why. Instead of solving their financial problems, the man plans to give his daughter in marriage. At the time, the woman thought it was very early and their child wasn't ready for it. She doesn't understand why he doesn't listen to her opinion and thinks he's entitled to make up his own mind and make such important decisions. She reminded him that Alice is not only his daughter, but hers too, and she has the same right to decide whether she needs it or not. In response, the man said that it was a mere formality. Theirs would be with his wife only on paper, and after 10 years, according to the agreement, she could divorce her. The girl's mom was just horrified by what she heard and didn't understand how he could even think of such a thing. At this moment, the girl heard everything and could not believe her ears. She also, like her mother, never thought that her father could come up with something like this. Besides, no one understands what he needs it for. The man began to tell them that this was a very good option for them, and explained that they would be able to give the guy everything he needed, and at the same time, get some benefits. The woman became so unbearable to listen to it that she asked him to stop and told him she was very disappointed in him. She decided that she would never let him do that. The woman never thought that her husband would use her daughter for some kind of gain, and yet not even consult her or ask her what she thought about it. And the worst part is that he doesn't ask not only his wife, but also his daughter, who, although she is young, has the right to decide whether to marry or not, especially at such an age. She finally told him that she wouldn't let their daughter's life be ruled in that way. Even though they are parents, their daughter doesn't owe them anything. If they have any financial problems, it's their problem, not Alice's. In which case, he reminded them that they were doing so badly that if they didn't do as he planned, they'd have to sell almost half the house to at least eat properly and have clothes to wear. He said that if his wife was so adamant about not agreeing to his plan, she must realize that the money would not just appear. They would either have to sell something or simply marry off their daughter. He thought it was the best idea, and in that case, they wouldn't have to sell anything else from the house. His wife looked around and almost cried. She saw that they had already sold almost everything. All they had left was the floor, walls, and roof. At this moment, a child comes to them. The girl opened the door and no longer hid that she heard everything. Her parents were very scared because they did not want to burden her with problems and tell her what it was for. Mom is the most scared of all, although she is strongly opposed to the idea. But even she understands that in such a situation, they really have no other choice. There is nothing left at home that can be sold and make money. She very much does not want to talk to her about it, and her father is very ashamed to admit that they, as her parents, could not even manage to provide the family with food and make sure that no one needs anything. Suddenly, to their surprise, the girl herself came up. She did not listen to them and said she wanted to help. She decided that she would get married after all and help her parents. The very next day, Alice was sent to the residence of the Marquis. Her father did not wait long and ordered a carriage for the near future. When the girl arrived at the fancy house and saw where everything would take place, she thought that the dream life was beginning, although in fact, it looked much better than it turned out to be in reality. She wondered what it would be like to get married. Alice began to imagine lots of flowers, a gorgeous dress, and a nice atmosphere at the ceremony, just like in the pictures. But at this point, she didn't even have her mom with her. She got there alone and didn't know what was in store for her. Instead of calming the girl down and telling her that everything would be all right, she was treated as if she were an adult and had done something wrong. Alice started asking a lot of questions, but in response, she was just ignored. Even then, the girl felt that she shouldn't have done it, and regretted that she had decided to do a good deed. At one point, one of the assistants came up to her, a look on her face as if she were being forced to marry an unknown man and agree to something unknown. The assistant said that the girl was expected and hinted that she had better not be late. She had such a cold look in her eyes that Alice was afraid to be in the same room with her. The woman grabbed her hand and started to lead her around. She didn't explain anything and started acting too disrespectful. She took advantage of the fact that the girl is much younger and can't respond to anything. Alice asked to go slower, but no one heard her. The girl does not have time to run so hard, and does not realize that no one cares about her so much that no one even notices that she is still a child, and can't move at the pace adults do. No one thinks about it or pays attention to it. In the meantime, the very moment when it was time for the ceremony, there were many guests in the hall. Most of them, the girl sees for the first time in her life. She becomes very uncomfortable with the large size of the dress because, as expected, no one cares if she's comfortable or not. Alice barely tries to hold it back so that the dress doesn't fall to the floor, and the ceremony doesn't turn into an embarrassment. At this point, she felt very lonely, because not even her parents are around her. She saw everyone around her gossiping about something and thought they were definitely discussing her outfit. The girl felt very embarrassed because there were grown-ups everywhere, and not a single person her age around her. It becomes very difficult to hold back from crying and turning around to go home and stop this torment. She does it for her parents, and they didn't even come to support her in this difficult moment. After a few minutes, her husband-to-be approaches her. He starts slowly taking one step at a time so as not to scare her or make things worse. Although in fact he also does not quite understand why he should marry a girl who is far from his age. The guy tried to ignore it, because at that moment, he realized that she is much more difficult. He motioned for the girl to look him in the eye and tried his best to pretend he wasn't embarrassed by anything. Alice saw the beautiful color of his eyes and for a moment was able to relax, but it lasted only a few seconds. Then, so as not to look frightened, the girl first began to familiarize herself and said she was very glad to see him. She started to run towards him to hug him, but unfortunately she was a little overzealous. Alice wasn't looking under her feet and accidentally tripped over him. It was a very embarrassing moment that almost ruined everything. She was very embarrassed and didn't know what to do in such a situation, because now there were a lot of strangers looking at her. In the end, everything turned out as usual. The most difficult moment, the girl wanted to do the best, and in the end, made it worse. But fortunately, no one began to laugh. Though it was only like that for the first second, Alice could never think that grown people would laugh on purpose, so that in that moment, she felt just awful. The girl cried, for she heard laughter so loud that it was impossible to restrain herself. But unfortunately, this is not the most offensive thing that could happen. The girl is approached by the groom-to-be's father, and in a very gruff voice orders her to stop crying. Unclear why, but he initially treats her as if she owes him something, his behavior surprising even his son, Jake. The man didn't stop and proceeded to order her to get up immediately and finally sign her name. Instead of calming the girl down, he walked over to her, grabbed her hand and began to lead her to the table where the document lay. Is he so afraid she won't sign the contract that he's letting himself behave towards her like this? But luckily it wasn't that bad. Jake came right up to her and made it clear that he wasn't like her father. To show that he was a real man, he turned to his father and everyone present and said that he and his future wife did not like being here. So, he suggested not to delay and do the deed right away. Alice felt a little better, but still, she continues to regret agreeing to unknown things, not even finding out what she would have to face. Because at the very least, she won't have a good relationship with her husband's parents, as she and the guy have just seen. No matter how much she wanted to, the girl couldn't walk away and change her mind. She tearfully signed the contract and realized it was the worst and first mistake of her life. At this point, the guy looks at her and wonders how, after all this, she has the will to sign anything at all. But no one even realizes that in reality, the girl would give anything not to do it. She was doing great before, and now it's like she's not living her life. Everyone turned away from her, even her parents, whom she never doubted, chose profit in return for her wedding. They were not interested in what will happen next, and what will be the family of her future husband. Meanwhile, an invitation from the royal family, and as soon as his father found out about it, he immediately said that it was impossible to refuse, for the sake of his family, or rather, for the sake of its future. You can tell by the reaction that the guy doesn't really want to go there, but so far, he hasn't learned to say no to his father, so he's forced to do something he would never do. As soon as his father left to go about his business, Jake looked at his wife and genuinely felt sorry for her. He went over to her and admitted that he was genuinely sorry for what she was going through. He understood how hard it was for her to be here alone and promised that he would try to help her. Not knowing the situation, he started to hug her parents because he thought she had a bad opinion of them. The girl heard this and started to resent him. She said that she decided to help them herself, and at the very least, her mom was against it, and her dad just wanted to save the family, and it was the only way they wouldn't be left without a home or food to eat. Jake started prying and said that her family should have seen from the beginning that their business wasn't profitable and abandoned it before it was too late. After that, he silently turned around and went about his business. Alice realized that he was just like everyone else. She couldn't help crying again, because the girl knows that things aren't quite as they think they are. She knows her parents very well and realizes that they really had no other choice. It's very frustrating that other people who don't understand anything start blaming them. Her parents have always worked several jobs, just so that their daughter would not need anything, and no one is to blame for this situation, because sooner or later, any business ceases to be profitable, and this is normal. Meanwhile, her parents are doing well. They've got so much work that they don't even have time for a vacation. Her mom is still sitting in the office and doesn't know when she's going to rest. And she's already been approached several times by an assistant and offered to reschedule things for tomorrow. She actually enjoys working, especially after not knowing what to do for a long time. Once the business started to grow, she and her husband are motivated to do something again. Even though it's very late and she's really quite tired, she genuinely enjoys the whole atmosphere, the paperwork, and the sheer amount of things to do. She can't stop thanking her husband for coming up with a great idea and thus restarting a successful family business. But it's strange that none of them remembered about their daughter. They're not interested in what she's going through. Besides, the girl is very young and she more than anyone needs support, or at least to understand what her parents think about her. But unfortunately, there is none of that. Even Mama is completely absorbed in work and papers. She was most opposed to the idea, and now she has forgotten Alice's existence at all. Meanwhile, the very day of the girl's coming of age, in which she planned to terminate the contract. A lot of guests gathered. Most of them are interested to see the girl who has not lived together with Jake for a long time. People do not even hide the fact that they forgot her, as well as the guy himself. For this day, the staff prepared for several days, and each guest was invited by a separate letter. Surprisingly, the atmosphere today is similar to that of their wedding day. Meanwhile, they announced the appearance of Alice. The girl has been waiting for this moment for a long time, and is sure that nothing can prevent her from getting a divorce on this day. She wore a very beautiful dress, picked up a very beautiful image, makeup and hairstyle. She is excited about this event the way ordinary girls are excited about a wedding. She doesn't really want to linger in this room because there are no people she wants to see. On the contrary, there are only people she wants to see for the last time in her life. Some of the guests have forgotten that they had any wedding at all years ago. They try to remember something, but can't do it at all. Although maybe it's for the best, and they'll never remember laughing at her before. Meanwhile, the guy is in no hurry to cancel the contract for some reason. He's busy doing his own thing and ordering his assistants to do something soon. He's supposed to turn in some reports today, but they're still not in. He hasn't received any documents, even though he asked for them a week ago. At one point, he happened to think that although he was married, it was very strange of him to forget his wife and at the sight of her not remember who she was. After that, various people started coming into his office and reminding him that his wife was waiting for him. They had agreed to meet an hour ago, and he still couldn't sort out his work. The guy realizes that no one is interested in this. Everyone is an adult and should be able to manage their own and other people's time. They began to tell him that the girl appeared in a beautiful outfit, and she even began to be envied by some aristocrats. Jake heard this and realized that he needed to see her as soon as possible, and especially the girls, who suddenly, for the first time, were jealous of someone else. Sensing something wrong, Jake threw on his jacket and started to run into the hall. He thought that some of the aristocrats would want to take revenge on his wife, and thought he should prevent that from happening. No one realized what it was. The deputies remained standing where they were and decided it was best not to interfere. I wonder what will happen next, because so far only one thing is certain: this day will not end quickly. In the meantime, he ran into the hall. The guy was very scared, because he thought he was going to have a serious conflict here. But so far, everything was calm enough. He was even surprised, because he didn't have to save anyone. Jake asked where his wife was, but it was as if he was ignored. After that, he looked closer and noticed that most of the guests were slow dancing. He noticed Alice right away. Surprisingly, she was already with some other guy. The girl definitely didn't miss him, and she probably wasn't even thinking about him right now. Judging by her mood, she's doing just fine without him, dancing, smiling, and not thinking about anything bad. Jake looked at the person she was dancing with, and at first he couldn't remember the person. He started to get really angry, which means he still has feelings for her and he cares who she's socializing with or just dancing with. At that moment, he felt redundant and overall, somehow very strange. He felt as if he didn't want to part with her, even though a few days ago, he couldn't even remember her. All the guests look at her and admire her. Even the aristocrats who just envied her wanted to make friends and chat after the dance. Meanwhile, Alice feels like the happiest person. She has all the attention. She is admired even by those who are used to envy other beautiful girls. And today is the long-awaited day when she will be free and looking to start a new relationship. Of course, she really wants to take revenge on all those who laughed at her. But now, she does not think about the opinion of others. The girl has grown up and began to think only about herself, about her happiness and comfort. Everyone immediately started looking at the guy, but he definitely didn't expect this. Jake feels too awkward, even though he thought this would happen to his wife. But suddenly there was an aristocrat who wanted to get revenge and kick Alice out of the gym early. And she didn't succeed last time, but she's going to do it this time. She's holding a glass of red drink, and from the looks of it, that drink is about to end up on Alice's dress. She purposely started to come closer and closer, pretending to just admire this beautiful girl. But at the same time, she has such a sinister look that it's hard not to realize what she's doing it for. By some miracle, but the guy immediately realized it and began to stealthily approach this aristocrat. His task is to protect his wife, and make sure that today no one harmed her and did not spoil her mood. He's very nervous because he's not in the best situation. He's got a lot on his mind, but for the first time ever, he's not thinking about himself. He's thinking about someone else. It felt like an eternity, although in fact he had just walked into the hall, and in just a few seconds, he was in the center of the hall. At this point, it turned out that Alice had not just agreed to dance in front of everyone, even those who hid their envy and could retaliate at any moment. The fact was that this was the way the family business was advertised, namely the dress and jewelry, which most of the girls who saw her in it wanted for sure. She received a lot of questions about where to buy it. Accordingly, this proves the fact that everything went according to plan. The girl was sure that she wouldn't even be able to last a single minute, but so far, no one had even hit her or laughed at her, as suddenly, she just started to leave. But one of the men, who had been looking at her for a long time, asked to dance one more dance, if of course, she still has the strength and desire. To do it, the girl looked at him and actually thought, because she did not know how to refuse correctly, so that the man did not take offense and left her alone. She didn't even have time to answer, but at the same second, her husband came up to her, came very close to her and apologized for keeping her waiting. He immediately explained that it was a lot of work and promised that he would try not to do it again. At that moment, they looked into each other's eyes, and surprisingly, they felt something. Is it really what one would think? At least that's what it looks like from the outside. Alice was so excited and looking forward to this day, and now can't take her eyes off him. The guy also recently didn't even remember her, and now all thoughts are only about her. They couldn't even get a word in edgewise, Jake especially. For those few minutes, he didn't even blink once. And that's not all. Even the girl didn't expect that, after he ignored her existence for 10 years, this man would ask her to dance, and not even ignore her further. In response, she immediately refused and did not hesitate to explain that she allegedly had other plans and had no time for it at all. Jake looked at her and thought that maybe he didn't deserve anything better, because it was his own fault for leaving her alone and not even asking if she had any problems. Literally a second later, he hadn't said a word and decided something had to be done. The guy grabbed her hand and started to lead her away to some other place. Alice was frightened and immediately thought about whether she should go out with him at all, because she didn't owe him anything, especially in such a strange situation. He didn't accidentally even have her talk to him and waste her time on him, except that he grabbed too hard and she couldn't even pick up. The only thing she could do was respond, but no one checked to come up and protect her from the Duke. That noblewoman who wanted to pour a red drink on her dress became very angry, for she realized that he had purposely led her away and made her dance the dance. No one understands what's going on because instead of just terminating the contract and going about their business, everything dragged on for hours. Turns out he just wanted to insist that they do this dance no matter what. But it's not clear how a man who doesn't care about her can want to dance, so it can be assumed that he has some feelings. The girl suspects it, but anyway, she's not interested in it anymore. As soon as she starts to try to run away, he takes her hand even more firmly and asks her to just be quiet, to trust him and not ask any more questions. Alice doesn't understand and becomes even more indignant, because she thinks he's just stalling and won't let her go for no reason. When suddenly, just like that time years ago, she sprains her foot because of uncomfortable shoes and started to fall. She was already scared and thought it couldn't be any other way, but at some point, the guy reacted in time and didn't let her hit and fall down. It looked very beautiful, as if it was part of an incredible dance. Is it really his way of trying to correct his impression of himself and keep a normal relationship even after the breakup? They looked into each other's eyes again, and this time it was clear. If the girl really didn't want to be here, she would have left long ago. But now, she didn't even remember the contract and looked at him as if she had fallen in love at first sight. He has the same thing. It's strange that before, many years ago, he didn't see her as a beautiful girl, and after marriage, he immediately started to perceive her as a stranger. And it was on the day of the divorce that they started to feel something inexplicably for each other. And it definitely means something, only they're not ready to admit it yet. not even to themselves. Meanwhile, Jake took the initiative and began to lead her badly in the dance. The girl appreciated it at once and said she trusted him completely, for if she began to think for two, she would only make things worse. Eventually, they didn't notice, so stopped looking at each other with hateful stares, as they instead became interested in learning something interesting. The girl began to develop that their family business began to develop well and bring a good profit. And of course, it is his merit in it. She thanked him and promised him that when he needed help, she would be happy to do whatever was needed for him. After that, it turned out that Alice had written to him more than once and warned him that she wanted to break up and have a termination party. But since she had gotten no response, she had to show up unannounced and take care of her outfit herself. Jake doesn't understand how that can be and wondered if someone had kept the letter from him on purpose. He said that he really hadn't received any letters and explained that it was some kind of misunderstanding, because if he had received one, he would never have ignored it. Though in fact, in these words, the girl very much doubted. He only now began to treat her well, and before that day, he would not even remember her name and did not realize from whom he received the letter. Alice answered with certainty that it was certainly not a mistake, for she had been writing letters to him for 10 years, and he had never answered any of them. Consequently, these letters either did not reach the Duke, or he was deceiving and had not opened any of them on purpose. Anyway, it doesn't matter now, because a lot of time has passed. They have changed a lot, and now, the only thing left to do is to part quietly and remain good friends. Jake genuinely understands how this could have happened, which means someone really didn't want him to remember his wife, much less answer her letters. Not to think about the bad things, the girl told him not to get upset or even try to work it out, because even today they were all sharing to say goodbye and not to blame anyone else. In any case, she is very grateful for his help, because in the end, her father's plan worked and her suffering was justified. Thanks to a 10-year marriage, she was able to start her own trading company and create a dream life for herself and her parents. She has no regrets now, and she's sure they'll be much better off separately than together. At this point, some guy comes up to them. He apologizes for disturbing them and distracting them from the conversation, even though he really doesn't care at all. He said it only out of politeness, and then afterwards, asked for a little time, sounding as if something bad was about to happen. Meanwhile, the three of them left the banquet hall to talk quietly without anyone overhearing. Jake asked what the guy wanted to talk about and hinted that they didn't have time for that at all. The guy didn't procrastinate long and asked just one question that he was very interested in, which was why they had suddenly decided to get a divorce. The husband and wife did not hide anything. The first to start was Jake. He explained that their 10-year contract is coming to an end, and after that, added Alice. She said that during the marriage, she received enough financial support, thanks to which she was able to restore the reputation and the family business. So, they no longer have no reason to be together, because everyone got what they wanted. The guy heard for the business and started talking about it. He said he heard her family put a lot of effort and time into it, so is very keen to give advice that relates to today's event. Guy and girl are eager to hear and understand what he means, because it sounds very interesting. As suddenly, he says he advises them to hold off on dissolving the prenup, or at least, do it after a while. But definitely not now. Jake and Alice don't understand what it's for, and what it has to do with the business, and her parents' business. He says that even 1 month will be enough. He needs to assign them a secret investigation in the castle that no one can know about, unless of course they are okay with it and have time for it. He explained that it was top secret information, so the details he unfortunately couldn't share with them. But once they got through with everything, only then would they be able to find out everything. The girl didn't understand what was going on and decided to ask why he had chosen them for this, since he had plenty of acquaintances. Besides, it was unknown what their divorce had to do with it. Explained that as husband and wife they wouldn't arouse as much suspicion. Unlike his acquaintances who had less normal reputations, Jake wondered what they should do about the contract. Since it was about to expire, the guy replied that there was no problem at all, and if it was just that, everything could be solved. The only thing that mattered to him was that they agreed and said that they would try to help, and the rest didn't matter. He's willing to help solve their paperwork problems and anything else that might get in the way of agreeing to this offer. It seems to be really important to him. It's so weird that it's a bit alarming for the guy and the girl, because they don't even know what it's for or what will happen if someone finds out about it. They have not yet said a single word, and the guy is sure that he has already succeeded in persuading them. The girl is very much in doubt, because she is afraid to regret that she has again agreed to unknown. She didn't even bother to hide the fact that she would only agree if he told her everything in detail. But for now, she had no desire to even continue the conversation. It was completely pointless. She smiles sweetly in response, but at the same time, has finally decided that if a person refuses to tell at least something, cooperation is out of the question. She was not afraid and replied that she had no time at all now for all these royal dubious intrigues. She apologized and asked to be understood. But the guy didn't stop even that. He keeps talking with a confident look, and it seems he has a new plan. He's not going to stop and intends to get a positive answer. At one point, he suggested doing things a little differently. Does he really have a more interesting plan to interest each of them? At least the groom is already very interested to know about it. The guy got closer and started talking to Alice specifically, since she was the one most against cooperating and agreeing to anything. The guy thought of something to interest her, and suggested that if she agreed, he would assign her family's company a royal supplier. These words sounded like a dream that she could never even think of. The girl imagined what could be if she just agreed, because now, this offer seemed even more favorable. The title of royal supplier shows that the company's products have been recognized and tested by the royal family itself. To achieve this status, you need to be one of the best, and even this, only a few people in the world achieve it. All materials for sewing dresses and jewelry, they buy in other countries, but processing and sewing takes place in the kingdom. The family tries very hard to make everything the best and highest quality, but it is still not enough to enter at least one of the top 10 companies in this field. Even if the company opens its branch in the capital, it is unlikely that anyone will pay attention to it. It takes time, connections, and building up a client base. However, if this title will be in her family, or rather in the company, a queue of aristocrats and those who want to buy their products will appear in the stores, and this is the dream and mission of any business. That's a very interesting offer. Only one question is anyone really willing to give such a thing in return for some investigation that lasts less than a month? How suddenly, the girl still decided to refuse and said that she would not let him break his promise. She is not used to change her mind and is not ready to agree to suspicious conditions, especially those that relate to the family business. The guy silently said he wouldn't bother her anymore, and said that since it was her final decision, he wouldn't hold her up anymore. Meanwhile, Alice had gone to her room, but the boys stayed and decided to talk for a while. Jake still had a couple questions for the king to get a better idea of what it was all about. He apologized to calm down and explained that he wanted to ask some questions, but as it turned out, it wasn't him who would be asking the questions, but the king. He stares at one point with a thoughtful gaze and realizes that, at least one of them, he has to change his mind and get them to cooperate. He's going to be in serious trouble. Jake got his attention and offered to cut to the chase. He asked what he was up to and why he needed to be patient with the breakup. Besides, he really didn't see what this had to do with the investigation. In response, the king said that the guy himself must realize that he can't divorce right now, and if he does, it will only be worse for him. The fact is that if it happens, and especially if it is known to all who have been waiting for this moment, the aristocrats will not let him rest. They will pursue him even outside his house, especially since the queen dreams of making Sophia, their first princess, his wife, and becoming related to the Marquis. If one of the 7 boys orders Jake to marry Sophia, he will have no right to refuse. The guy answered that he understood it perfectly well, but now he didn't know what to do about it, because at least Alice was going to get a divorce, and she didn't care about anyone's opinion. Besides, they had a contract with a clear date and time. The king decided to give his last advice and said that it was better to bear with the parting than to get involved with a den of snakes. That is, aristocrats, who would give him no rest for the rest of his life. He said a month would be enough. It's not that long, and besides, in that time he could help him and himself, because maybe during that time, Alice would change her mind and not want to break up, although it sounds very strange. And besides, he doesn't know what their relationship is and how they got married. In the end, the king asked that Jake postpone the divorce at least until the ceremony to choose the crown prince by any means. Even if it is impossible, his wife will refuse the idea. Jake agrees and says they'll start living in the palace tomorrow. Except, I really wonder how he's going to do it and what to tell his wife, who refuses to even talk about it. And that was not all, for the conversation could not end so quickly and easily. The king reminded him of something else, which also, it was best not to forget. Lastly, just as he started to leave, the king looked at him and said he wanted to say one last sentence, or rather, the advice, even if they divorce her sooner or later, he will still have to marry another high society lady sooner or later. The guy is so unwilling to even think about it that he said it's out of the question. He doesn't allow for the fact that someday he'll love some aristocrat while many guys only dream about it. For him, it's something he'll avoid for the rest of his life. Even if he agreed to extend his contract, he would instantly lose the mood and desire to talk about it at the mention of any of the aristocrats. In the meantime, he had returned to his mansion, and in fact, he didn't realize how he'd done it. He hadn't noticed the time had come, or how he'd ended up at the door at all. Jake is so tired that he even forgot to say hello to his assistant, even though he is used to it and understands everything. The man suggested that he make himself comfortable on the couch to resume after the long drive and remember what other things he had to do today. Jake was almost falling asleep and couldn't find the strength to even open his eyes. He barely uttered something like he really wanted his favorite tea, and luckily the assistant immediately understood what the gentleman meant. He brought out his favorite tea and said it was at least a little, but should help relax and come around. The guy started drinking tea and remembering all the things that had happened during today. There were so many important conversations, moments, and amazing news that he had learned. As soon as he remembers how much his wife wants a divorce and to finally terminate the contract, he doesn't understand how to change her mind, much less ask her to pretend that they're doing fine. The king insisted on his own way so strongly that unlike the girl, he could not refuse him. Whether it was easier for him to agree to do the impossible than to do as he wished, namely, to divorce his wife and go on living in peace, not to owe anyone anything and not to try to talk someone into doing something. It turns out that he has a lot of problems that could have been easily avoided. After all, he still has a lot to learn from his wife. He doesn't seem to feel sorry for that he made a bunch of promises to the king that he could have just not talked to them. Besides, he'd never asked for his help, so he didn't owe him anything to agree to something like that. At one point, he happened to want to talk about the letters his wife said she had sent almost every month for 10 years. But for some reason, they never reached him. The guy found out that all this time they were in a dark cellar, and it was unknown who put them there and for what reason. Because all other letters from other people or relatives always appeared on his desk on the first day of receipt. He decided that he wouldn't leave here until he found all the letters. The guy started looking in all the boxes, not to miss anything and read every word his wife sent him. Now, it's much more important to him than it was before. According to the assistant, they are all here somewhere. He opened a huge mountain of crates and for some reason, it was covered with some kind of cloth, so no one would see it and want to see what was inside. The aide lifted the cloth. Jake looked at it with his own eyes and wondered, for someone on the staff had really dared to keep those letters from him. He thought it was more likely that someone had been manipulated or forced to do so, such as the aristocrats who obviously didn't want him to communicate with his wife. He saw a small box that was very well hidden with different colors, big objects, and everything else that hid it very well. He couldn't help himself. He took it and started to open it up. Surprisingly, the box was very small, and over the years all the letters had fit in it without any problems. Jake was afraid to open it, because he had no idea what he might read in those letters. And that's not all. The assistant said that recently, he found out that she sent letters not only on ordinary days, but also on his every birthday. In fact, he's very scared to open them, because probably there are very nice words, after which he will want to be with this girl again. She probably told him she loved him more than once and asked him to come visit. And with each letter, there were probably fewer and fewer of those words. He had a lot on his mind right now, and actually felt a little ashamed because he could have guessed that she should have sent him something for his birthday. At one point, he happened to look to the side and saw the familiar flowers in front of him, the light just shining on them, and they stood out very well and prominently from all these gray objects around him. It turns out that he was not just surprised and even a little upset. The fact is that these flowers reminded him of his childhood, in which he was afraid to receive gifts, and all because of his father, who was very strict and forbade to be happy even on his birthday, much less to receive any gifts. He remembered himself as a teenager, when he had been afraid to even hint that he wanted to go out or celebrate a birthday with his friends. It had been under strict prohibition for so many years. When he saw a lot of guests with flowers and various interesting gifts, his mood would immediately deteriorate, and no one could understand why. The guy would start crying even on such a beautiful day. He still has the feeling even now. It's when he accepts or expects to receive a gift. He has an immediate feeling of guilt and a memory of his father punishing him for something like that. If he had to go to his past, he would never do it, because there is nothing worse than those times when he did not feel like a child at all. While other children were happy, went out and gladly accepted toys as gifts for him, it was strictly forbidden. He never even talked normally to his father, because every time he saw him, the man would purposely come up with a punishment for nothing. The boy could do nothing, well, almost every day, was punished for something. He even had the impression that if he smiled or just felt good, there was already some guilt in it, and a sense that it shouldn't be like that. Sometimes when his father organized an event, he did it only for profit, and as soon as the guest tried to give something to his child, Jake felt just terrible. He didn't know how to refuse and act in such a way that we didn't offend the person, and at the same time, didn't accept a single gift. It seemed to him that behind his back constantly stands his father, who at any moment can punish him even for gratitude for some congratulations. He constantly and perhaps even unconsciously spoiled his self-esteem. Now that his father can't do anything to him, he still has the habit that he is not worthy of presents, and even more so can't accept them. To date, as soon as he hears this word or sees something in a beautiful package that resembles a gift, he immediately gets angry and unconsciously hates those who have a holiday or birthday party. It's been that people who don't know that he has a special attitude towards gifts gave him something and then were on the blacklist of guests that he personally brought in. He strictly forbade his assistants to let in this house people who want to give something or say something nice. So only those who want to give bad news or demand something or just spoil the mood are in this house. Meanwhile, Jake opened the box and decided that this time he must read every word. He had given up so many things in his life, and now, at last, he wanted to read the pleasant words and imagine the love with which his wife had written them. The assistant, to whom his problem and attitude towards gifts is very well known, was very surprised. He even asked if the guy was sure he wanted to do it. Jake silently opened the letter and asked that the man not distract him, or he would ask to leave this room altogether. It went something like this. Alice knew the date of his birthday very well, and every time sent almost the same thing. She wished him a happy birthday, and said she hoped he was having a good time those days, and promised to pray for his health and success. Of course, she very often sent him flowers that she had personally grown and intended to give to her lover. At least that's what she used to think he was, until he started ignoring her every letter. He imagined how she really tried and sent each letter, how she smiled as she thought of each word and hoped for the answer she'd never gotten in all those 10 years. As soon as he thinks about it, he wants to cry. He's not used to feeling that kind of emotion, but now he's genuinely ashamed, because he realizes how hurt she was by not getting anything in return. The guy never thought that the girl he hadn't even remembered all these years would make him think of himself since the day she came to ask for a divorce. Now he does not even think about the girl with whom he was before. All his thoughts only about one beautiful and lovely lady, which he himself lost and ignored all this time. And now, clearly very sorry and wants to return everything very interesting what he will do next, because so far, he has tears and guilt. He does not understand how he could forget her, and not even write a single letter. He realized that it was very unfair because she thought about him every day and hoped for a letter back. And at this moment, he didn't even remember her and was with another girl. She was constantly fed up that he was doing well, and when she didn't get anything back, she was sure he just had a lot on his plate and didn't have time to answer them. How suddenly, in one of all those letters, he noticed something for which he was even more ashamed. For the moment, her family decided to heed his advice, to give up the unprofitable business. The girl thought it was a good idea and even thanked him for it. The guy remembers this moment very well, how he was unafraid when they first met on the day of the ceremony, and said that her family's business would never be profitable and it was best to get rid of it as early as possible. That's when he first saw her tears and heard how important the business was to her family and that they would never stop doing it. At this moment, he suddenly wanted to apologize and answer every letter, except that now there was no point. With the girl, he could see any day and say it in person. But this way, all these words he could never say, because it would be very embarrassing. He wanted to make amends and do it as soon as possible. He wonders how she's even talking to him normally after he's ignored her all these years. After that, he immediately turned to his assistant and said that he really needed his help. The man was surprised and promised that he would do what he could. The main thing was to keep the gentleman satisfied. Jake asked for a bunch of stuff to be prepared, but didn't explain what it was for or what he was up to so far. It's some overly secretive mystery. Meanwhile, the assistant prepared the best carriage and did it really very quickly. As promised, Jake didn't have to wait long. He even hurried to get ready and not to keep anyone waiting. The guy sat down in the carriage and thought about where to start, because to leave everything as it is, he certainly will not. At the very least, he needs to fix the situation and make it so that even if they break up, to keep a normal relationship. First, he decided that he should honestly admit all his mistakes and apologize, as a real man should. Because without that, there was no point in doing anything else. He began to think how to do it, for he had to think of something special, so that in the end Alice would never resent him again and would forgive him sincerely. Meanwhile, the driver approached him and informed him that they had arrived. Jake hadn't noticed how quickly the time had passed, but that was even better. Meanwhile, the girl is going somewhere in her room, and at some point, someone happens to come to her door. She lets herself in, even though she wasn't expecting anyone. She was wondering who would want to come in just after lunch, since everyone's resting or asleep. A handsome young man who looks like her lover has come to see her. Whether this is actually the case is still unknown. But in any case, it is clearly not someone from the staff. The guy says that the merchant ship has already arrived, so he will leave her for a couple of days and promise that he will try to return as soon as possible. After that, Alice also started to apologize and said that she didn't want to put all these responsibilities on him, but unfortunately there was no other way. The guy answered that there was no problem. Besides, he wasn't busy at all and would be glad to help her. He has long wanted a change of scenery and a new environment, and he is sure that the trip will be very interesting and unforgettable. In that case, the girl is even glad. She could never have thought that when she forgave him to help. For him in this will not be any problem. On the contrary, he is even happy to go on a little trip. She shook him good riddance and just in case, apologized again, because it probably wouldn't be as perfect as he planned. If it was that easy, she would have done it herself a long time ago. In any case, she is truly grateful to him and doesn't know what she would do if it wasn't for such a wonderful person like him. The girl is sure that if she asked someone else, people would start finding a lot of excuses just to refuse and pretend they don't have time for it. She promised that when he needed help, she was the first place he could turn to, and she would be happy to do whatever was needed, without any hesitation or excuses, as he had done. In fact, Alice has been considering him for a long time as someone to consider a relationship with, but for now, she wants to take a break from it all and be alone. Her life is already too busy with no time for even a vacation. As suddenly, she just left the room to escort this guy out as she immediately sees her husband. She clearly didn't expect to see him and doesn't understand what he's doing here. She seemed to feel what it was like when someone arrived unannounced, as she had done a while ago. The girl even forgot to say hello. for it was very unexpected. She had other things on her mind at the moment, but seeing him in her house, it was as if she had lost the power of speech. He could not even imagine what he had come for and what he wanted to say. The guy looked at her and made it clear that until he got what he wanted, he would not leave here. He had already made a promise to the king, and now it was the most important thing to keep it. Even if she refuses something and says she wants a divorce, he will stand his ground to the last and will not agree to leave on his own. He will only do it with her and her things. After that, Jake looked at the guy next to her, and it made him feel a little bad, thinking that he was the new guy she'd come to ask for a divorce for. But he wasn't going to leave. There's nothing more important than the promise he made to the king, because he'd never let that happen if he came back and said he'd failed.